My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a project manager for a defense contractor. I spend my days coordinating complex logistics, ensuring every piece of equipment, every timeline, every personnel movement is accounted for. But the one thing I couldn't account for, couldn't predict, was the moment I walked into the garage, searching for my old deployment photos, and found the familiar cardboard storage box tipped over, its contents strewn across the concrete floor. It wasn't just messy, it was violent. The photos, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, were ripped, bent, and some even had jagged tears through the faces. My face. My friends' faces. The landscape of Afghanistan, reduced to crumpled trash. My stomach dropped, a cold, hard knot forming in my gut. I knelt, picking up a torn image of my unit standing proudly by a Black Hawk, the familiar desert sun glinting off our helmets. The helicopter was ripped right down the middle. Before I could even process the full extent of the damage, my dad appeared in the doorway, a shadow against the afternoon light. He saw me, saw the photos scattered around me. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, and said, with a calm I found truly chilling, "It's for the best, honey. You need to move on." My hands trembled, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, a silent promise forming in my mind. This time, I would decide what was best for me. To understand why his words cut so deep, you need to understand my dad, Robert Jenkins, and the quiet war that had simmered between us for years. My mom, bless her gentle soul, passed away 5 years ago from a sudden aneurysm. Before that, she was the buffer, the soft landing between my dad's rigid expectations and my independent spirit. Dad was an accountant, meticulous and risk-averse. He saw the world in columns of debits and credits, profit and loss. My decision to join the army right out of high school, to deploy to a combat zone, was, in his ledger, a catastrophic loss. He'd never understood my desire for service, for purpose beyond the safe, predictable path he'd laid out for me. He'd tried to talk me out of it, then guilt-tripped me, then ignored it entirely. When I came home from my first deployment, changed but stronger, he barely acknowledged my uniform. He'd immediately started talking about community college, about finding a nice, stable civilian job. The photos, those physical memories of my time overseas, were my anchor. They were proof of who I was, what I'd done, the bonds I'd forged. I kept them in a sturdy plastic bin in the garage, a place I thought was safe, a place where they wouldn't provoke him. After Mom died, the dynamic shifted. Dad became more isolated, and in his grief, his need for control intensified. He'd always been particular, but now it felt suffocating. He'd rearrange my kitchen cabinets when I was at work, organizing them to his liking. He'd comment on my clothes, my friends, my late nights at the office. I was still living in my childhood home, partly out of a sense of obligation to him after Mom's death, partly because the housing market in our suburban Philadelphia town was brutal, and partly because, despite everything, he was still my dad. I loved him, or at least, I loved the idea of the father I wished he could be. A few months before the photo incident, the pressure had ramped up. I was offered a promotion at work, a challenging role with more travel. I was excited, but when I told Dad, his face clouded over. More travel? Sarah, you're already barely home. Don't you think it's time to settle down? Maybe find a nice man, start a family? He didn't congratulate me. He saw it as another step away from his vision of my life. I remember sitting at the dinner table that night, my untouched plate of his famously bland meatloaf growing cold, as he launched into a monologue about how women in the military often struggled to find partners, how my unconventional career path was making things harder for me. I just nodded, pushing the food around, feeling that familiar sense of shrinking. What I didn't understand yet was how deeply he resented my military service. It wasn't just a choice he disagreed with, it felt like a personal affront, a rejection of his values. He saw it as a dangerous, unfeminine detour from what he considered a proper life. He never asked about my experiences, never acknowledged the sacrifices. He just wanted it to be erased. The photos were a constant, tangible reminder of the one part of my life he couldn't control, couldn't rewrite. The week before the garage incident, I'd mentioned to him that my old unit was having a virtual reunion. I was excited to reconnect with some of my closest friends, especially Maya, my battle buddy from Afghanistan. I'd even pulled out the box of photos, planning to scan a few to share. Dad had been unusually quiet that evening, just staring at the TV. I thought nothing of I just assumed he was in one of his moods. That detail mattered later. When I knelt there in the garage, surrounded by the wreckage of my memories, his words "it's for the best" echoed in the silence. It wasn't a question, it was a pronouncement. A judgment. I picked up a torn picture of Maya and me, grinning, covered in dust, standing in front of a supply tent. Her face was ripped clean off. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't draw a full breath. I stood up, slowly, clutching the mutilated photo. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what did you do?" He sighed, a sound of weary exasperation, as if I were the problem. "Sarah, you're 32 years old. You need to stop living in the past. Those pictures, that life, it's over. It's time to focus on your future. A real future." He gestured vaguely with his hand, encompassing the entire garage, the entire house, his entire worldview. "I just thought I was helping you move on. It's hard to do that when you're constantly looking back at old wounds." He truly believed he was doing me a favor. He believed he was protecting me from myself. For a moment, I just stared at him, the mutilated photo still in my hand. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't even acknowledging the violation. He was justifying it. And in that moment, I recognized the pattern for what it was, not just overprotective parenting, but an active, deliberate attempt to erase my identity, to force me into a mold he'd created. He hadn't just trashed my photos, he'd trashed a part of me. And he was doing it with a clear conscience. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Dad, you had no right." Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the doorway, leaving the scattered ruins of my past on the garage floor. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the image of the torn photos replaying in my mind. I thought about the small, framed photo on my nightstand, the only one that hadn't been in the box. It was a candid shot of Maya and me, taken by another soldier just before a particularly tense mission. We were laughing, despite the fear, despite the dust, despite everything. That photo, a symbol of resilience and camaraderie, was my most cherished possession. It had survived because it was always out, always with me. The next morning, I called Maya. I told her everything, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She listened, her own anger palpable even through the phone. "Sarah, that's not for the best. That's messed up. You can't let him do this to you anymore." Her words were a lifeline. She didn't offer solutions, just validation. That conversation solidified something in me. I couldn't stay. I couldn't let him continue to chip away at who I was. My preparation was quiet, methodical, just like my job. I started searching for apartments online, focusing on places that were affordable and had good access to public transport for work. I updated my resume, even though I wasn't looking for a new job, just to feel prepared. I called my bank and set up a separate account, transferring a significant portion of my savings. I insured all my important documents, my birth certificate, passport, military discharge papers, were in a fireproof bag hidden in my closet, separate from anything Dad might consider clutter to be organized. I didn't want to confront him until I had a plan, a way out. I knew if I showed weakness, he'd double down. 2 weeks later, I found a small, one-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes away. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I signed the lease, paid the deposit, and arranged for movers. I didn't tell Dad any of this. I continued to act normally, though a quiet tension hummed beneath the surface of every interaction. He seemed to think the photo incident had blown over, that I had accepted his help. He even started talking about cleaning out the garage properly next weekend. The day before the movers were scheduled, I packed my personal belongings. My clothes, my books, my few pieces of furniture. I carefully wrapped the framed photo of Maya and me. As I packed, I found an old photo album, tucked away in the back of my closet, full of pictures from high school and college, before the military. These, he hadn't touched. It was only the deployment photos, the ones that defined my service, that he had targeted. That knowledge hardened my resolve. That evening, I sat Dad down in the living room. He was watching the evening news, a glass of iced tea on the coaster beside him. "Dad," I began, my voice steady, "we need to talk." He turned, a slight frown on his face. "Everything all right, honey?" "No, Dad, it's not. It hasn't been all right for a long time." I took a deep breath. "I'm moving out tomorrow." His eyes widened, then narrowed. "Moving out? What are you talking about? Where are you going?" He sounded genuinely surprised, as if the idea had never occurred to him. "I've found an apartment. I've signed the lease. The movers are coming tomorrow morning." I watched his face contort through several emotions: surprise, confusion, then a flash of anger. "This is about those silly photos, isn't it? Sarah, I told you, it was for your own good. You're overreacting." "No, Dad, this isn't about silly photos. This is about you disrespecting my choices, my life, my identity. It's about you trying to erase who I am because it doesn't fit your idea of who I should be. You had no right to destroy my memories. And you have no right to tell me what's for the best in my life anymore." I stood up, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from trembling. "I love you, Dad, but I can't live like this. I need to live my own life, on my own terms." He stood up too, his face red. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You'll regret this. You think you can just run off and be happy? You'll be lonely. You'll be struggling. I'm your father. I know what's best for you." He was shouting now, his voice cracking. "I'm doing this for you." "No," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you're doing this for you. And I'm doing this for me." I walked to my room, closing the door softly behind me. The next morning, the movers arrived. Dad stayed in his room, the door shut. He didn't come out to say goodbye, didn't offer to help, didn't even acknowledge the empty spaces left by my furniture. Moving into my own apartment felt like shedding a heavy skin. The silence, initially unsettling, slowly became a comfort. I called Maya, and she promised to send me copies of all her deployment photos, a small act of restoration. I bought a new, sturdy storage bin, not for old photos, but for new memories I would create. Our relationship, predictably, became strained. Dad called a few times, leaving messages that swung between wounded accusations and thinly veiled attempts to get me to move back. I kept my responses brief, polite, and firm. I visited him for Sunday dinner once a month, but I always left before dark, before the familiar arguments could start. The kitchen cabinets in my own apartment remained exactly as I arranged them. On my new nightstand, prominently displayed, sits the framed photo of Maya and me, laughing in the dust. It's a quiet testament to resilience, to friendship, and to a part of me that will never be erased. He said trashing my photos was for the best. He was wrong. Leaving was for the best.